My name is Greg Gorga, Executive Director of your Santa Barbara Maritime Museum. I want to welcome you all this evening to our monthly lecture, Detecting and Capping Leaking Oil Wells in Summerland by Harry Rabin. We've been looking forward to this for a while because Harry was able to do it a few months ago, but very happy to have it tonight. You're going to learn a lot. And he has a whole panel of speakers that he'll introduce you to for this talk. Before we get to that, I do want to thank Marie Morris Rowe, our sponsor of this lecture series. I know you're out there, Marie. Thank you very much for that. I also want to let you know that the Maritime Museum is open Thursdays through Sundays, 10 to 5. And then I believe in about 2 weeks, we'll be back open on Mondays and Tuesdays as well. So back to our pre-COVID schedule, 10 to 5 every day except for Wednesdays. The museum store is also open with that schedule. And our wonderful 4th floor visitor center, I believe, is open every day now, 10:30 to 4:30. So come down here and see the best view in Santa Barbara. I want to let you know that we do record this, so it will be up on our website. Usually takes us about a week or so to do that. Just to catch you up on everything that's going on at the Maritime Museum, we had our annual fundraiser. We did a paddle out for SBMM this past week. I want to thank all of you who helped sponsor that and participated. We had over 40 paddlers safely paddling out off Ledbetter Beach. I want to thank, we are in the middle of doing Maritime on the Move, our education program that allows students mainly to explore their own backyard. We have that program on our website for Carpinteria, Santa Barbara Harbor, and also Flaco Lake. We are currently doing that class for City of Santa Barbara Parks and Recreation camps on Mondays and Tuesdays. We're doing that all summer with them, 2 classes a day. And some of our children these last few weeks have had the lucky pleasure of having Jean-Michel Cousteau join them on that Maritime on the Move program. So next month's lecture is July 15th. It is titled Hawaiians, Catholics, and the Town with a Bay in Front and an Amphitheater of Hills Behind, the Education of Richard Henry Dana, Jr. in Santa Barbara by Rick Kennedy, who is a professor at Point Loma Nazarene College. So we all know Dana's history here in Santa Barbara, first stop on that voyage in Alta California. So we're really looking forward to that lecture as well. And then we are about to open a brand new exhibit. It's never been shown anywhere in the world before. It's actually up already. So if you want to come down tomorrow and see it, you can. But it officially opens on June 23rd. The Wednesday, it'll be a special day, will be open to our members only so they can preview that exhibit. And then June 24th, it'll officially open. It's called Heritage, Craft, and Evolution, Surfboard Designs from 1885 to 1959. And it features about a dozen or so surfboards by the amazing Rennie Yater. They've been worked on by Kevin Ansell, so they have a historical finish. And then the artist John Comer has painted California surf scenes from 1885 through 1959 onto them. So, and that exhibit will run through October. I hope you follow us on Facebook and get our emails. If you're not on our emails and get our updates, you can sign up very easily on our homepage at sbmm.org and get our current newsletter. I want to thank all of you out there who are members of the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum, and especially those of you who are members of our Navigator Circle or our flagship society, which means you have us in your planned giving. And our Navigator Circle members have been enjoying tonight a special happy hour on our beautiful front patio. We're doing that every Thursday in the summer for our Navigator Circle members, so well worth being a member of that. I do want to remind you that this is a Zoom webinar. So you will be able to write questions that our panel will answer at the end of their presentation. Please use the Q&A box. That's the Q&A box, not the chat box. Please put your questions in the Q&A and I will ask them at the end. And now I'd like to present our speaker tonight. Producer, director, and documentary filmmaker Harry Rabin is the CEO and founder of On the Wave Productions, an award-winning production company and a leader in high-tech camera and custom support gear. From the land to under the sea and up in the air, his cameras and gear have been there to capture first time ever witness action as it unfolded for the world to witness. Harry has worked alongside Jean-Michel Cousteau, documenting the infamous whale jail in Russia, and with James Cameron, Mike DeGree, who's a former board member here, the late Mike DeGree, the wonderful Sylvia Earle, and other notables on many documentary-based film projects. A 40-year resident of Santa Barbara, he previously presented his film Into the Shark Zone here at Santa Barbara Maritime Museum, and Harry's passion for the ocean and all marine life within it recently prompted the formation of Reef Guardians California, Hawaii, where he plays a lead role in the working with scientists and researchers to better understand the problems plaguing our reef systems and looking for solutions. Currently, he serves as an advisor to Heal the Ocean, the Academy of Underwater Arts and Sciences, the Whale Sanctuary Foundation, Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and numerous others. He's very busy. I'm glad he got time to speak with us tonight. More recently, he discovered leaking abandoned offshore oil wellheads and worked alongside government and private industry to get them capped and to stop the destruction off the coast of California. So please join me in welcoming Harry Rabin and his panelists. Thank you.
Well, no, thank you so much, Greg. That was a tremendous introduction. Glad you could all join us tonight. We hope we keep you entertained here. This is a very important issue. It took a lot of collaboration, a lot of teamwork once we found these leaking wellheads to get them fixed. So what I'm going to do now is show you a brief video. I'm going to share my screen here. There we go. And you've seen this one already. And we're going to just basically see what's been going on around Santa Barbara involving these leaking oil wells as well as natural seeps. So here we go. It may stutter a little bit. I did put a link at the end of this presentation where you can watch the video as well.
Yay!
Oh, the audience out there.
Oh,
So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of our panel members here briefly. That overview that you saw, we're going to touch probably in more detail with the experts who are on this panel, such as Mike Giuliani and Dr. Dave Valentine, Joe Fable. Everybody who's joined us here are experts in that field. Now, I wanted to start off with Heal the Ocean. That's primarily who I work with here in Santa Barbara. And the head of that organization, Hillary Hauser, who probably most of you know, or you've heard her voice somewhere in proximity, you know it's her. So Hillary has quite the background. I think when I started diving as a kid, 15 years old, I was reading diver magazines, and there was Hillary Hauser's name all over everything. She's an ocean advocate like myself, and it was through Hillary that I first learned about the Becker well leaking, and then saw it leaking in my own backyard here, and followed the trail with a drone that led me to Summerland and the massive amount of wellheads that are out there. So Hillary's going to tell us a little bit about her organization, and I'm going to throw it over to you, Hillary, and you can talk about State Senator Hannah Beth Jackson, who you work with to get us some funding to get these wellheads fixed. So take it away, Hillary.
Harry, Harry, thank you so much. And that quick look you just did really brings tears to my eyes, because looking at where we started and how we got to what you have shown in this film, I wonder how we got here. Back in the early 2014, in the 2010, a lot of us ocean swimmers were noticing sludge, brown foam up and down the coast. We thought it was bilge. It was brown and foamy. It never occurred to me anyway that it was oil from Summerland leaking wells. And it got way up and down the beach. So about in 2016, Nora McNeely Hurley, with her husband, Michael, lives in a home overlooking Summerland Beach. And she called the Heal the Ocean office and yelled for help. She said, help. So this photo of them, she sends us this photo. I don't know if you have the picture of them up. This is Nora and Michael. And I didn't know them at all, but she said, we got to do something, got to do something, got to do something. And then she sent this picture of Becker Well right beneath her house. It's now known as Becker, but this ugly black thing that you put in your film. And she said, look, and so Heal the Ocean, we did some research. There were other groups doing work on oil. I mean, isn't this nice looking? There are other groups that are doing work on oil, so we don't want to step on toes. We deal with bacteria and sewer systems and stuff like that. But ocean pollution is ocean pollution. So Heal the Ocean mantra is, if you want to fix something, you got to find the money. So we hired a consultant, Jane Gray of Dudek, and she said, yes, we can get the money. So with that, I went down to the State Lands Commission was holding a hearing in Orange County. A bunch of us went down. I went down and said, we're going to find the money. And the chair was Gavin Newsom at the time. He looked at me and hadn't seen me before and thought I was bonkers. But some state land staff and lawyers followed me out of the hearing and said, let's talk to you. They ended up coming up to Santa Barbara to meet with our consultant in the Heal the Ocean offices about getting 1.5 million to cap that Becker well. So we didn't get the grant, but what we did get was the interest of the State Lands Commission. They loved the hooray and let's do it and let's do it. So eventually they rabble-roused to get the money into the budget, and Becker Well got capped. Now comes Senator Hannah Beth Jackson to introduce SB 44, $2 million a year to clean up what are called legacy wells, abandoned wells. Harry Rabin's film has explained the situation, but as SB 44 was passing through committee and committee and committee, we followed it all the way through, this table, that table. And we knew that we had to have backup. So through the generosity of Nora McNeely Manitou Fund, we hired Aquios, an offshore oil contractor, which hired Planck Aerial System for a bunch, and for a bunch of Manitou money, we produced this picture. Is that the picture? I was thinking of another picture, but that will do. But it shows you it's a drone work, it's grid work, and you can see definitely what's going on there. So as SB 44 headed to the final file committee, I can't remember what it was called. I think it was called the Exterminator Committee, where everything over 1 million is inspected, re-inspected, and Governor Brown was very tough on economic waste. And the argument was there's oil leaks all over California. How do we know what's what? How? So this literally happened as this issue was going down the hall for this particular decision. Hannah Beth's aide, Sid Nang, called. I said, wait. I'm getting this picture, this and another one. And so he waited till the last minute, ran down the hall to the exterminator room with his laptop, showed the committee this picture and other pictures, and I'm not making this up.
Hey,
And
Hillary, do you know that
What?
Hannah Beth actually has joined us? So maybe.
I know that. I
yeah.
see her.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
see her. Thank you, Hannah Beth. She can verify this. But with this action by her aide at the last minute with this Planck, it's obvious it's not just here and there, a needle in the haystack, they were saying. It's obvious what it was. And SB 44 passed, and that's how it happened. And I'm not making this up.
So Hannah Beth has joined us too, and she was our state senator, I believe, for 8 years, or you can correct me on that, Hannah Beth. And you can certainly add in here and enlighten me. The one thing I wanted to say about this Planck photo that Hillary brought up that helped make the case for getting the funding for getting these wellheads abandoned and capped. You could see in this picture, there's a bunch of squares, and a lot of people out there don't fully understand what this is a drone had to fly repeated times and put together what's called a photogrammetric photo. And it combines where each square that you see there, rectangle, it flew that, and then it combines all those together to make a complete image with detailed GPS info and gives a complete picture. So Hannah Beth, maybe you could tell us when you went into that committee to try and get this money, maybe you could I'm setting the stage here for you. You could tell us what happened.
Sure. Well, if you'd like me to jump in now, I'd be happy to do it. And
Sure.
I wanted to first thank Heal the Ocean and the indomitable, irrepressible Hillary Hauser. And I'm sure when she first met Gavin Newsom, he probably wasn't aware of this force of nature and probably was wondering, who is this force of nature from Santa Barbara who is here as a whirlwind to make us pay attention to something that we really hadn't been willing to acknowledge for a period of time. So, this community really prides itself and has prided itself in living in an extraordinary place and feeling a sense of responsibility to it. And that was sort of the way in which I presented this legislation, which, by the way, was a result of Summerland folks, I think of people like Lee Heller and others, who had been monitoring these seepages for a number of years. And of course, we know that in the late 1890s and early 1900s, when these wildcatters were just drilling these wells, when they were no longer successful, they just walked away. They'd throw some rags down to close them up and never did it successfully and left. And so they became abandoned. These companies were long gone, and yet we know the oil seepage was happening. So when I first brought this bill as a result of the work of the folks in Summerland, as a result of Hillary just being determined we had to cap this Becker well, it wasn't as well received by the governor as I had hoped. So we went around a second time. What made the difference this second time was the fact that this was a collaborative effort between a nonprofit like Heal the Ocean, between a corporate entity which was able to film and to demonstrate, to show that there were at least 200 wells out there in our channel that were uncapped and that were leaking. And the fact that there was money that was provided by this nonprofit, the commitment that was made to try to capture this image so that we had the data that would demonstrate that we had these orphan wells which were leaking and creating health problems, environmental problems. We finally got the governor's attention, and not only did he sign the bill, but most importantly, you know, as Hillary mentioned, you got to find the money. We actually were able to take money that is available through the State Lands Commission, through minerals taxes and fees that they charge, and said to the governor, look, we can pay to cap these with existing state funds, money that the State Lands Commission brings in as a result of these various mineral fees and so forth. When we let these companies take our asset, our natural resources, we charge them a fee. We will use that fee to start capping the wells. We started with Becker. There were a couple others that were critically important, and we're able to get through the budget a commitment to $2 million a year for well capping up through 2027. And this continues to this day. We don't have to go back every year and beg for money. It's there. There's a recognition. There has been a recognition of the importance of doing this work. And indeed, it was, frankly, really showing what this data was. You know, a picture is still worth 1,000 words. And as a result of the hard work of the community, of Heal the Ocean, of the State Lands Commission buying into this, of the work of my office, and I'm going to tell Sid that you gave him a big shout out. He understood how important this was to us. And as you say, you know, he showed it to the committee. The dramatic impact of it was clearly and unequivocally felt. And here we are today.
That's
Thank
great.
you.
Thank
Yay.
you. So, okay, so now it's time. I am going to lead us down the rabbit hole right now with our another expert panel member regarding these wellheads. And it was extremely important to determine whether these leaks were natural seeps or if they were actually, you know, human introduced, you know, wellheads. So if they indeed were natural seeps, we certainly couldn't do much about that. You can't alter Mother Nature's actions. So discovery was a very long, drawn out process, which required the best of the best people to work with, such as State Lands, their experts, and Interact, and our very own UCSB Earth Sciences Department. And this next panelist, my first introduction to him, actually, I was in the Gulf of Mexico with Mike Degree, and we were filming the Deepwater Horizon catastrophe. And who, of course, was there that we kept seeing every day was none other than Dr. David Valentine in the Valentine Lab, because he is quite the specialist and an expert in the field of hydrocarbon seeps and spills, not to mention his recent discovery of 500,000+ barrels of DDT out in the channel off of the Los Angeles coastline there. So Dave was clearly my go-to guy. And Dave, if your throat's warmed up here, I'd like you probably to address, you know, the background of Santa Barbara and oil in general, and you can explain what mounds are. And then what I always come to you for is here, it's over here. I've got espresso and mocha samples of oil that I always bring to Dave and go, Dave, can you run a DNA check for me and tell me where did they come from? So
yeah, so from the halls of the state legislature and rapid political action back to the Miocene period, tens of millions of years ago, without hopefully putting everybody to sleep. But that's really where the story of oil in the Santa Barbara Channel begins. And that's in the Miocene and even back a little further into the Eocene. So tens of millions of years ago, when the oceanographic conditions that existed off the coast allowed for really high levels of productivity, a lot of phytoplankton in the ocean waters. And when those settled to the seafloor, the conditions of the time also allowed for the preservation of the molecular building blocks of those organisms to survive into the seafloor as it was gradually buried. And eventually, as that process occurs, it heats up until it's been buried so deeply that it's higher than the boiling point of water. And at that point in time, what happens is that those building blocks begin to rearrange, and they form hydrocarbons, oil and gas, that make up those the materials that we extract today and that we're talking about with these wells. So, what happens down in that subsurface, we're talking about, a couple of miles deep, is that oil, that gas gets formed, and then it has to find a place to go. And it'll find any sort of void spaces that exist. And if there's no void spaces, it'll follow whatever conduits there are to get out to the seafloor. So what Harry has actually put up here is an example of a location where oil is coming out from the deep subsurface and emanating at the seafloor. This is actually in the western part of the channel. It's at about 1,500 feet deep. And each of these features is an individual hydrocarbon mound about 60 feet across. So this is a whole field of places where oil once seeped. It's no longer seeping. At this point, it's all solidified, almost crystalline-like. So what's happened since then is, since 10 million or so years ago, is that plate tectonics has taken over. And it's really wreaked havoc on the sort of orderly layering that once occurred in the offshore environment here. And it's really altered the subsurface. And what we have now are conditions where you have these, what used to be strata have now gotten warped into different shapes. They've gotten broken apart by faults. And they've created these nooks and crannies that allow for oil to really accumulate at high levels. And that's what these wells were tapping, were these high-level accumulations of these oils. So I think that answers your age-old question, Harry. Happy to take others. You're on mute, by the way, Harry. Yeah, you're still on mute, Harry.
I shouldn't be now. That's why I always come to you, because I'm always finding these samples of oil everywhere. And, it's great to know the background of geologically how this all happens. And I think Santa Barbara is a very rare area. I think there's only a few places in the world. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think somewhere near Russia and here have this unique formations under the ocean and this large amount of oil. Now, when I find these oil samples, it's hard to determine, are they from an old wellhead, or are they, what's the source? And the primary one I went to you with, you had used a DNA procedure to tell me, oh, that's Treadwell, because you had a sample before. Maybe you could talk just a little bit about how how we use DNA of oil of a earth substance, and how you can determine where it came from.
Yeah, sure. And it's a forensic approach, and really it boils down to that every sample of oil tells a story, and that story is captured in the different molecules, the different components that make up that oil. And there can be thousands or tens or even hundreds of thousands of different molecular structures that make up oil, and some of them are coming from the organisms that ultimately died to make that oil. And so we're often looking for those molecular structures that are indicative of those organisms, and their relative proportions can be diagnostic of a particular oil. And so, for example, in this case, what we were looking at in these oils was in part what wasn't there, because when I first went, I thought this would be a sort of typical oil, something like we were working with forensically during the Refugio Beach oil spill. But when we started looking at this stuff, completely different. The organisms that gave rise to the oil, that left their molecular fossils, are totally different. It has indications that it was cooked in the subsurface at much higher temperature than many of the oils we find around here. And so there's all these signatures that you can look for if you have the right tools to analyze the composition. And that's really what we were after. And in this case, I was so interested in engaging because during the Refugio Beach oil spill, we looked at hundreds of different samples, and some of them were really weird. And as it turns out, this was one of the weird ones that at the time I wasn't able to explain where it came from, but it was so strikingly different from most of what we see in terms of abandoned oils on the California coast that I just had to jump at the opportunity to go in and say, yes, Harry, I will take one of those jars from you and get a look at it.
Yeah, and you know what? And Dave is a rare scientist because when he said he'd jump in, he literally, we took 2 kayaks and Dave and I think Chris Reddy from Hui, they went out in the water. I'm trying to point to them and have them follow the drone and get a sample. And Dave's getting these sterile samples. He's like, oh, what the heck? He jumps in the water with the oil. And you can, in that little video, you could see Dave swimming around there getting his sample. So it's great to see a scientist that's not afraid to get their hands dirty compared to a few I have worked with that just stay in the lab. So thanks for that, Dave. And what I'm going to do now is move along so we can look at a little bit of the history here. Let me get through that. So here's the wells of Summerland. Would you believe that these wells started coming in here at the turn of the century? And there's a few stories circulating around that there was so much oil in that area that someone took a large pipe, they shoved it into a seep, they lit it on fire so they could play volleyball at night. So whether that was true or not, I don't know. But that goes to show how much oil was there. So it didn't take someone with a high IQ to start drilling and look for that oil. And that's what they did back then. And these were the world's very first offshore oil rigs. Now, you can go ahead and look at this slide here. The problem was there was not enough oil, so it wasn't financially feasible. And as it says here, production did cease in the early 1900s. And today's oil leaks and sheens we see all the time still. And that's a leftover from what? Well, it's a leftover from, would you believe, over 192 offshore oil rigs. So it's a little bit like finding a needle in a haystack. And we had to use a lot of technology to pinpoint which of these 192 were causing the problems and watching the currents. And that's where I came in and worked with Interact. And we watched over this area for weeks. Now, look at these old pictures here. These are, I believe, 1910. And it's amazing. The top picture here on the left, you're looking southeast towards LA. And I can actually see some of the wells that we found, like Treadwell. And below here, you're actually looking northwest up the coast. It should look familiar to some of you who've been in the area. Here you could actually take a stroll down Treadwell Wharf. This is what it looked like. So it wasn't enough to just have these submarine wells, they were called, on the shoreline. They started heading out to sea on these wharfs. Here's a little look at, this is the field of wellheads that we're dealing with. And this is from a thing called the Dogger Maps, which is based on a geological survey of all these wellheads that went in. And what we did is when we found these wellheads, we would actually try and label them on that map. So we'd get the general area, but it was a bit more difficult to pinpoint exactly where they were. And I'll be discussing that further with Mike Giuliani of Interact. This is a geological view. Dave would certainly know more about this than I would. You could see pictures of wellheads here and where they're penetrating down hundreds of feet to get to the oil sand. Now, this is a diagram of, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to come up with some process to seal these leaking wellheads? And this is where, again, Mike came in as a senior engineer. and developed methods for doing this called a cofferdam and pipe pile, and he will address all of that. And this actually might be a great time to bring you in, Mike. And then we're going to have Joe come up next to talk about all the challenges and how state lands was involved. So I'm going to hand this over to Mike Giuliani from Interact PMTI, Action Company.
Thank you very much, Harry. And let me just say that it's been an absolute pleasure to be involved in this project with you and Heal the Ocean, and especially State Lands. It's a very meaningful project to clean up the environment, especially for the Summerland community. And it's definitely a highlight in my 37-year career. There's no doubt about it. And so Harry's given you some background. Let me just add a few things to that. As oil wells go, these wells are very shallow. They're only 300 to 500 feet deep, and they were targeting, shallow, heavy oil deposits. And the problem is that there's no historical records of their construction or of the abandonment of these wells, which began in the 1920s. And Hillary was right. Well, actually, it was Hannah Beth Jackson was talking about the poor abandonment concepts that were involved. In many cases, they just threw all kinds of junk down the well that they didn't want to haul away. A lot of times it was iron and metal and pieces of tubing. And so, and then they would cap the well with like a 10 to 15 foot cement plug. So these were not very robust abandonments by today's standards. And they present a big problem when you're looking at a traditional abandonment, as we were originally with these, because to do a traditional abandonment, you'd have to clean these well bores out and then proceed with the abandonment. But it's very unlikely that you're going to recover all that junk. And in the process, you're probably going to damage the well, and you're going to leave it in a compromised position. And eventually it's probably going to be a leaker. So State Lands recognized this kind of early on in the process when they were beginning the bidding process. And so they came to us and they said, hey, look, we need you guys to come up with some alternative abandonment plan. And whoever comes up with the best plan is gonna win the work. Well, fortunately, State Lands liked our idea, and I call the concept that we came up with as a exterior well abandonment. And we were awarded the first abandonment, and that was the Becker well, and we completed that successfully in March of 2018. And then more recently, in November of last year, we followed up the Becker well with 2 additional abandonments on a single trip to location. Those would be the Treadwell 10 and the North Star 815. Again, both wells use the same methodology that I'm going to describe in a minute, and they were successful. So we've taken out the 3 most prolific leakers, and it's made a huge difference on the beach. But our work's not done out there. There's still 3 known leakers. And there's another one that we suspect is leaking, and we may find more as time goes on. So, but what's left are minor leakers compared to the first 3 that we abandoned. Okay, let me share my screen with you. Okay, so I've got about 9 slides to go through, and this first slide, the purpose of this is just to give you guys an idea of the concept of the exterior reabandonment. And on the left, you've got the pre-reabandonment concept of the well in a diagram, and then the one on the right is after the abandonment. And going back to the pre-abandonment diagram, if you're looking at what kind of formations that the well penetrates, you can see that the top of the well, in this case, it had a well cap on it, but it's about 4 foot beneath the mud line. And you've got sand and hard bottom for about 10 feet. And then you've got what we call the blue clay. And it's about 20 to 25 foot thick in this particular area. And then beneath that are where the oil formations are. And those formations are interdispersed with occasional clay layers. But the key thing here is the blue clay. The blue clay is a really fine-grained clay that has very low permeability, and permeability describes the ability to transmit fluid. So it's a great cap rock to block the migration of hydrocarbons to the surface. But the problem is when they drilled these wells, they did not cement across the blue clay. So if you look, you can see that more than likely that annular space between the well and the blue clay filled in with beach sand, which is very permeable. And so there's a leak path. The oil can leak into that annular space that's filled with sand and make its way up and around the well cap to the surface. That's one leak path. The other leak path, because the wells were so poorly abandoned, is the oil can leak directly up the casing. And these well caps were kind of an odd approach to try to re-abandon the well. And in this particular case, it was a 55-gallon drum filled with cement. It's really difficult to get a hydraulic seal. And in this case, the well was both leaking up the annulus and right through the well cap. So that was a condition pre-abandonment. So the way that we abandon these wells is, first of all, you've got to expose the well. And in this case, the well was in about 6 to 8 feet of water. And once the well is exposed by excavation, the first thing that we do is we put in a shoring ring. And that shoring ring then just keeps sand from sloughing back in and maintains exposure of the well bore so that we can take the next step, which is to drive pipe pile over the well. So I got to tell this story because Harry likes the story. So when we were trying to figure out this alternative abandonment concept and it was thrown in our direction, I didn't know what to do with that in the beginning. And I literally was driving down the freeway trying to think of how are we going to abandon these wells. And I came by a freeway overpass that was under construction, and they were driving pipe pile. And they drive pipe pile frequently for foundational work and stuff for freeways and other construction projects. But the thought just hit me. Well, why can't we drive pipe pile over the well into the blue clay to reestablish a seal? So in this picture, here's the shoring ring right here, and then here's your pipe pile. Once it's driven into the blue clay, the oil can no longer leak around the outside of the pipe pile. It can continue to leak up the annulus. But what we do then is we fill this up with cement, the annular space, and a certain amount above the top of the well cap in this case, and then we weld a steel plate over the top. And once that's done, you've in essence encapsulated the well against the cap rock or the blue clay. And no matter if it's leaking up the casing or up the casing formation annulus, it's all entombed by the pipe pile, the cement, and the steel plate. And so that's really the concept there and how we do the abandonment. And from here on, I just want to give you some pictures of each step of it, just so you can kind of see the magnitude of what we do. It's very complex, and every well has its own, the concept's the same, but the application is different, whether you're in the surf zone or you're further out, in deeper water, or if you're up on the beach. So you got to get creative for every well to implement the basic strategy. So anyways, in this picture, remember the first steps to excavate the well, and that's photos of divers manipulating a dredge system there. And you can see it's pretty shallow where he is. And then, so again, once you've exposed the well, the next step is to set the shoring ring, and that's to preserve the well and so that it won't be covered up with sand, because it'll want to cover back up pretty quickly. So this is a picture of lifting that up with a rather large vibratory hammer. It's one of the largest vibratory hammers in the world. And that just vibrates that shoring ring into the bottom to give kind of a firm foundation for the next step. The next step is to install a pipe pile guide ring. And in purple here is the shoring ring, and the guide assembly is shown in gray, and then your pipe pile is in green. And the purpose of this pipe pile guide is, if you can imagine, if you look at the picture next to it here, and you can see it's fairly flat and calm out there, but if you can imagine the barge moving just a little bit on top of the water, imagine what the top of that crane's doing. It's swinging all over the place, which causes the pipe pile that's suspended to swing around a little bit. It makes it very difficult to get it stabbed over the well. And so this guide system gives you kind of a much bigger area to funnel that pipe pile in and then directly over the well. And so once it's over the well, then you're on the downhill slide here of the abandonment. And that's just to take a vibratory hammer and drive it into the ground and into the blue clay. And this is North Star 815 in the photo here. And that it's just about at its depth at this point. And then after that, we remove the pipe pile guide, get that out of the way. And that's a picture of that taking place there. And then it's time to do the cementing. And so we constructed a nice little platform for workers to stand on. And then we just pump cement through this tube down this pipe, fill up the annular space between the well and the pipe pile up to the very top of the pipe pile where it's going to be cut off. And then that's the cementing operation. And then the next thing that we do is we cut the pipe pile off after the cement's in place to the final elevation of the pipe pile, which in this case, it was a couple of feet above the top of the well. And then all that's left at that point is to take the final step, which is to weld a steel cap on the top of the well. And this is a picture from Becker. And of course, it had a different approach. We, as Harry mentioned earlier, we implemented a cofferdam here to maintain a dry working environment while we did the abandonment and facilitated this welding operation as the last step. So basically, that's all I have. That's the concept. It's pretty simple, but it's very effective.
It's okay. You can unshare there. You may say it's simple. It's extremely complex, and it takes a long period of time.
The concept is simple, but the execution is where the complexity comes in. And let me tell you, there's a lot of things that happen. You got to be able to problem solve on the fly with these jobs for sure.
Oh yeah, that's most evident. So thank you for that, Mike. I appreciate it. I wanted to add one thing. I heard they were throwing, when they were trying to plug those wells up and not do it properly, that's where the missing sock concept came in, because people were donating their laundry and stones and cement to plug up those wellheads.
Not surprising.
Part of this too is they had to weld these, I don't know, they're 30, 40-foot sections of pipe to each other and continue to drive that down. And when you look at this diagram here, it shows they're trying to get into that blue clay, which is impermeable. So are the other clay layers. So they took it as deep as they could, and it's a pretty good process. It worked pretty well, and Interact and State Lands are to be commended for doing it. There were a lot of challenges to doing this, doing it environmentally sound, meeting CEQA, and that's where State Lands comes in, because we have to get permitted to do all of this. So I wanted to bring in Joe Fable from State Lands, who works with a number of his colleagues who we've been dealing with over the years. I'm sure they're watching, like Sherry Pemberton and Walter Scott and Steve Kern, I know we worked with on Becker. So Joe, if you can enlighten us to the challenges and that process and what State Lands is all about. This is California State Lands Commission. You report to the governor, right? So I'll switch it on over to you.
Great, thank you, Harry. I appreciate it. And just to clarify, so I report to the Lieutenant Governor, and the Controller and the Director of Department of Finance. Don't want to get
I elevated you. Okay.
No, thank you very much. And again, thank you to the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum for hosting this. I'm honored to be here. And I also want to thank you, Senator, and Hillary and Heal the Ocean for the passage of SB 44. This really is a stable funding source. We've said it a few times, but it's really, it's helped my career and allowing me to do really interesting things. So I appreciate it. I wasn't involved in the development of SB 44. That honor does go to our, at least on our side, SLC goes to our exceptional senior management team of Jennifer Lucchesi. Probably all know her, talk with Seth Blackman, our chief counsel, and indeed Sherry Pemberton, Steve Kern, Eric Gillies, and quite a few others. What I represent, I suppose, is sort of a second generation of hands on this project. I work with Walter Scott, as you mentioned, and Peter Reagan, two talented engineers. And what we have done is essentially take that framework, that funding framework, and we've been tasked with, developing the program. And that's what we've done in connection and coordination with Interact through Mike and on the engineering side, and Michelle Piscini when she was there on the permitting side. But our goal really has been to evolve and standardize this process, because we're offered $2 million a year, which is phenomenal. But again, the way budgets work is we can only pay, what we have in the pot. So the logistics of this entire thing are incredibly important, getting it right, because clearly the interest in the community and the emphasis on doing this safely and actually doing it is vital. Now, I apologize, I'm a boring lawyer, so I have a boring PowerPoint presentation. It's what I do, it's what I've been trained with. But just real briefly, 30,000-foot level, administrative and logistic sort of concerns with legacy wall abandonment. And I just want to briefly go over, I have to do it, State Lands Commission, what are we all about? We are the state agency responsible for managing California's sovereign lands. These are tide and submerge lanes, generally from the mean high tide line out to the 3-mile limit. Also rivers, sloughs, lakes, and there's a lot of desert lands that we manage along with a variety of others. But what that has allowed us to do and forced us to do in many ways is manage and lease for oil and gas development, at least since 1938. Now, legacy wells, we've talked about them. They're essentially what CalGEM, or formerly Dogger, would call orphan wells. There's no operator that's responsible. We can't go after a third party to try to abandon these. They're just orphan wells that happen to be on state sovereign land. So it's a certain classification, but clearly the danger is unique, as we've seen. Drilled and plugged before modern standards. As we stated, SOX would not fly today. Kind of repeating everything here, 200 high priority wells, not necessarily leaking per se, but very capable of leaking under certain conditions, many of which absolutely are, of course. And prior to SB 44, projects were funded on a case-by-case basis. From understand, there was some work done in the 50s and 60s and the 90s. We did a well abandonment, and then there wasn't a whole lot except for studies until Becker well. And so that's been the great innovation in this. And so since Becker, that's where I sort of came aboard in managing the contracting on that. Again, we've worked to evolve and standardize the process, because the traditional notions of how to abandon a well, how to fund it, how to conduct CEQA, really we've had to reconsider, again, due to some of the limitations. We've had to sort of get creative, so to speak, and a high level of community engagement. We need to do this right. So just 6 little concepts going through here. This is all administrative procedure, but it's dreadfully important when you're in the process with CEQA, contracting, getting the engineering plan, budgeting, permitting, and of course, execution. The CEQA component, so just everyone knows, every time we abandon a well, we need to comply with CEQA because it's a discretionary action. We're deciding to abandon this well. And so in 2017, we analyzed a process looking at this traditionally. We're going to go out there with a drill rig and a blowout preventer. We're going to enter the well, and we're going to isolate the zones. But where we sort of went with that is consideration that maybe we need to try something new. If I understand correctly, Treadwell 10 has been abandoned or re-abandoned 3 to 5 times, depending on what by the time we did it. So that it clearly something wasn't working. So what we did in 2020 is reanalyzed this whole process using, again, this modified approach that Mike talked about. And it's innovative. You entomb the well. And that's a process we've been taking here. It reduces a lot of the risk because we don't know what's down the well. The pressures we don't know, they tend to be very low from what I understand, but if you don't know, you don't know. The contracting part of it, which we have sort of, again, a little bit non-traditional, but it's worked out in our favor, is we've relied on what we call it's a state process, the architectural and engineering process. So instead of relying on the lowest responsive bid when we go out and do this sensitive environmental work, we're able to utilize a process where we get to choose the most expert contractor based off of their expertise and how they're going to approach it. And then we negotiate cost after. So what that's allowed us to do is, choose what we believe to be the most expert entity to do this, and which again gives us assurance, and it should give the community assurance too. That's where Interact, they've been through 4 processes now where they've been awarded this. So, they are the experts in this field. And that's sort of a long, arduous process. State contracting is not fun for anyone. It's only fun once you execute the contract 6 months later, when you can actually get the work done. That fourth part, I believe, it's the engineering plan development. This is where Mike takes over. But what we require is that contractor goes through, and for each well, even though we're taking a fairly standardized approach now, we want you to look at every aspect and assess the risk and how we're going to modify the approach. So it's not cookie cutter by any means, even if we believe we found the right approach overall. So we have fairly detailed engineering plans and public documents. They're produced, and most importantly, there is a cost estimate tied to it. And this has been sort of a deficiency, I think, in state and federal government, is under assessing costs, in saying, this will cost such and such, and ends up being 3 times as much. So the way we're getting around that is we're having independent contractors or Interact actually get estimates of costs based off of market conditions. And so we have been able to evaluate costs and get very almost on numbers. And so this has been a new innovation. Seems pretty simple, but for government, it's been a new innovation for the last couple of years. Budgeting, again, clearly, SB 44 doesn't just do legacy abandonment. There's coastal hazard removal, old pipelines that are within the tidal zone, potential for SEEP studies in the future. It's set to fund quite a few things. So again, it gets to priorities. Right now, abandoning leaking wells appears to be our priority, which I think is right. We'll let the community sort of weigh in on that. But a nice thing we can do is we get $2 million a year, but we can bridge that funding for 2 or 3 years. For example, if we know we have a project coming up, the latest Treadwell North Star abandonment was about $3.5 million. So we bridged 2 years of funding, and we were able to accomplish something major. Permitting, oops, going backwards. You can just see a lot of groups, clearly community groups playing what we think is the biggest role in from the interest level, but everyone's participating. The permitting process is long, but we now have permits from essentially every agency to do our work. So we don't have to go back. Usually there's notification, minor modifications, but we're now able to hit wells as we have the money to do so. So that's a great innovation too. And final execution, Mike talked about that. State Land's job is sort of monitoring spill response, communications, that's Sherry Shop, and just, again, making sure that our contractors do what they need to do. Again, they do a great job, so we're in really good hands. And that is all I have.
Okay. That was great. I hope that was informative for a lot of you out there. What I'm going to do to kind of wrap this up, first, I want to thank everybody. All these panelists are incredible people working with State Lands, Interact, everybody, Heal the Ocean, even Reef Guardians had a play in this. It's been phenomenal. And look, we have capped, there's a difference when you talk about well abandonment and you talk about capping a wellhead. Abandonment is the whole process, right, Mike? It's the whole process, everything involved that you've kind of heard a little bit about here. It's hard to do all of this in an hour. It's pretty complex. I think we've done fairly well. Some of the terms that have come up in this too, that Joe was mentioning CEQA, this is California Environmental Quality Act, and EIR reports or environmental impact reports. We're no different than anybody else dealing with the environment. We have to do it right or don't do it at all. And part of Heal the Ocean's job and my job is to make sure that is what's going on here, that we have all our ducks in a row. Nothing personal to ducks. I like ducks. Anyhow, so the process continues here. What I'm going to show you, we are continuing to monitor these wellheads, and we're probably going to be doing that for a long time. This is a sample from a report that I work on and provide to the state and to Interact. We use the drones a lot. Drone technology is pretty amazing. You can see here, we're looking at Treadwell. We see a little bit of sheen. Where is it coming from? We monitor it. Turned out, as Mike pointed out, we do have some leaking wellheads up above here. So there was a wharf here. This is Treadwell 10. We go back up to Treadwell 2 or 3. We're going to determine which one. They are pretty insignificant compared to what North Star and Treadwell were putting out in the amount of barrels a year, just a phenomenal amount. That is over, thanks to great engineering by Interact and overseeing this project by the state. Let me just go to the next slide here. This was a recent thing. It turned out that we saw some suds here. Turned out I saw it was from a boat that was dumping their bilge in the area. You know, not a practice we like to see happening around this. You can see it's pretty clean though here. This is where North Star was, adjacent to the trail. The beach is clean. You know, I think 3 wellheads in 3 years is pretty phenomenal. And come July, we're going to get our 4th. That's going to be 4 in 4 years. So we're going to keep it up on behalf of the environment and everyone out there using those beaches. And at this point, Greg, I'm going to turn it over to you to help us with the Q&A here. And I'm looking at some of the questions here, and we will dole them out to the best expert on our panel to address them.
Thank you, Harry.
Harry?
Thank you, Senator Hannabeth and Hillary and Joe and David and Mike. Yes, we have quite a few questions, so let's jump right to it. So Kenneth would like to know, there are several remnants of the old oil wells off the beach of Elwood, because there's piers out there as well. Yeah. And there's a lot of the wellheads are along the beach. Is there any plan to do anything about those in the future?
Yeah, I know probably State Lands or Mike can address some of that. They're going all the way to Bacara too. There's wellheads that are going to be completely taken out on platforms over the next few years. You know, bear in mind when we were doing this, COVID was going on. I even had COVID during Treadwell, and I thought I contaminated the whole Danny Sea boat. I can't tell you. And still the work continued and we did it on time. I think that's going to be the case with getting these other legacy wellheads. And Mike, you know more about what's going on at Haskell's and in that area. Maybe you could address that question, or maybe Joe can. Or maybe not.
Yeah, I know. I had to just, I was on mute.
Okay.
Well, what's going on right now are the 421 piers. The engineering is taking place to decommission those piers. The wells on those couple of piers have already been abandoned. And so now it's just a matter of getting rid of those piers. But as you and I have spoke, Harry, there's likely some wells out there that in that vicinity that are leaking, and that's an area that needs additional study to determine the source of those leaks, to determine if they're from a well or from a seep. But we know that there was a significant number of piers out there as well, just like there was in Summerland. So there's more than likely some well contributors out there.
Yep. And I have been, as with previous monitoring for State Lands and Interact, you know, our company, we're still going out there and monitoring those areas as well and looking for oil. And it's great that people out in the community are calling Heal the Ocean and they're reporting this to us, because that's the best. You know, if the feet on the ground are the local people who live in that area. And that's how we found out about these problems in the first place. I hope that answers Kenneth's question there. Thank you for asking that.
Thank you. And is there any evidence that you have found of oil coming from underground on shore into the ocean?
Yeah, yes, there. Where the seal sanctuary is in Carpinteria, that was that bubbling you saw in the video. And I mean, if we have time, I'll play that video at the end again, because now that you've been informed, you're going to watch it with different eyes. You're going to see some of that oil bubbling up right out of the sand, heading right for the water. And we don't know if that's a seep, we've dug it up, or we don't know if it's infrastructure from Chevron's plant that was there, processing plant, and could be oil that's left over in the pipes, in the tanks. That I know is on the list too, to be decommissioned as well and taken apart. If you have anything to add to that, Mike or Joe? You know, seeps, you know, the difference between seeps and a wellhead leak, it's a hard thing to determine until you dig down there, you get magnetometers out there. It's pretty difficult. What we rely on are the geologic reports, the Dogger reports. Were there wellheads there in the past? There's a link here at the bottom that says link to Dogger well finder maps. If you go there, anybody can go there, you will be amazed. You can click and zoom in on California, you'll be astounded by the amount of oil wellheads there are. And maybe if you see them in your area, you can correlate that. You can even put what's on the Dogger map on your iPhone, and it'll literally walk you right to where that wellhead may be. But again, it is a difficult process. If we know there was processing of oil and wellheads in that area, differentiating them between a natural seep and man-made, human-made, is quite a task. And that's why we have people like Dave Valentine and Mike and everybody else here, Michelle Passini, who was tremendous from Interact in helping with this effort as well.
Harry, this is Joe Fabe. I could probably add a little bit more to that as well. That is the challenge. Where there is a leak, identifying, is it a seep, is it a well? Where we have found wells, identifying the well, because there is well finder for certain, but well finders, a lot of times the locational data is just wrong. It's not CalGEM's fault. It's just, it was GPS just normal lat long coordinates, entered in 30, 40 years ago.
Oh, sure.
We do luckily though, have funding to perform investigations. So absolutely, just to sort of repeat that, if there are mystery wells or sort of concerns, your organization is indeed a great one to go through. Mike Interact's a great one to contact as well, or even through the State Lands Commission.
Great.
So another question for you is, so you said there is 200 leaking wells. Can you just kind of define the geographic area of those 200 wells? And then is there any estimate of how many barrels of oil are suspected to be leaking from these uncapped wells?
Yeah, okay, let me set the record straight. There are not 200 leaking wells. There are 192 roughly wellheads that are offshore. We can't, see visibly until they start leaking. That's our indication we have a leaking wellhead going on there. And when we find that, of course, we address that. The second part of that question,
how many barrels
of oil? Well, Mike and I kind of tried to calculate that because we were watching the pipe pile fill up, because bear in mind, when we go down into that and bring that pipe to the surface and we cut the cap off, or the existing foundation on top of that, there was some oil that was coming out. And it was about 4 times what we estimated. I don't know what that number was. Mike, I think you have that number. How many? We took a good guess that there were a certain amount of barrels a day coming out of Treadwell, as well.
Well, historically, the wells produced, according to the records, the production records, there's no records of the well itself, but the production records and mention of production rates suggest that they peaked at 3 to 5 barrels of oil a day. Yeah. And when they were abandoned, they were making a barrel or less a day. But there was some instantaneous calculated rates on Treadwell that was multiples of that, but it was short-lived. Generally, once the pipe pile is driven, because the pipe pile is so massive, for North Star, it was 36-inch diameter, 1-inch wall thickness, and it weighs 350 pounds per foot. So when you drive it into the ground, you're displacing a lot of material, and I think you're crushing those sand grains and everything. And I noticed for Becker, once the pipe pile was driven, and with North Star, all leaking stopped. Treadwell, there was just a little bit of a delay, and it took overnight, and it was leaking into the pipe pile, but then it stopped completely too.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, that's one thing you kind of worry about. You have to estimate this beforehand, what you think the flow rate is, because you don't want to be putting that pipe pile over there and watch it fill up overnight and create another problem. So that, again, is the amazing part of this process and working with these people to make sure that doesn't happen. And mind you, we have Patriot always offshore with booms or whatever we need in case there's an accident. And luckily, all the operations we've done have been basically accident-free, other than a few lines breaking, backup ropes and things. Let's go to the next question there, Greg.
So as a reminder, this is recorded. We will have it up on our website, sbmm.org. It'll take a week or two to do that. I also want to mention that David Valentine will be doing a talk. You mentioned the DDT barrels. He'll be doing that talk for us here at the museum in October. So Bill, a good friend of the museum, wants to ask, what was the market in the 1890s that drove oil exploration here? And what was the oil being used for at that time?
Yeah, I think Joe would probably know more. Actually, I know Steve Kern was a history buff and knew all about that. You know, oil was valuable. There were automobiles coming in, and mainly it was for fuel and for lighting and everything, and for heating. So it had a good value per barrel until that plunge that it just wasn't worth pumping it out. It was kind of early in the game there before automobiles were everywhere like they are today. I don't know if anybody else on the panel has something to add there.
I actually could add that, you know, on the West Coast, you didn't get coal like you had on the East Coast. So as a fuel energy for lighting and everything, that oil was being used. It was being used as diesel or as they would convert it for lighthouses as well.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, and it was also being used to play volleyball at night, right? It's on the beach now. So next question.
And whale oil was going out of favor too,
Oh,
right? For lamps and
true.
things.
Exactly, they're harder to find.
No, it's
So,
a great question. Bill.
You talked about the oil, when you cap it, it no longer has an outlet out, but it's still leaking in that new entombment. Does the pressure ever increase over time?
Not really. The pressure's been so small. I mean, I know that Pier 421, it was 1 PSI, but Mike could probably answer that question.
The pressure is a function of depth. So for oil wells in general, the deeper the well is drilled, the higher the pressure that you have to deal with. And remember, I mentioned these wells are only 300 to 500 feet, and they're also been depleted, not only for the years they were online, but they've been leaking for decades. And so basically there's just enough reservoir pressure to barely push oil to the surface. So that's kind of the scenario you're in. There's very little risk of any kind of high rates coming out of those wells. And so, yeah, they're not very prolific. In today's world, it wouldn't be economic to even drill those wells.
Yeah,
but back in the day, they were.
I can add a little bit more onto that. A lot of the wells that we have locally are in what we call connectivity with the surface. And particularly in areas where you have seepage, even when they first go in to drill a lot of these, there's no pressure beyond the ambient hydrostatic pressure. And that's because of the fractured nature of a lot of these geological deposits that water can actually push down, which means that things can also come out. That's why we have natural seepage. And so a lot of these don't build up pressure because they're in connectivity already with the ocean.
That's great, Dave. Thanks.
So our boaters would like to know how far down these well heads and the caps are. So from the surface of the water, where their keels will hit them.
Yeah, I can answer that. They vary. For example, Treadwell is right near the mud line, and then, for example, Becker's is about 5 feet below the mud line. It's usually 4 or 5 feet below the mud line in that neighborhood.
There is one you mentioned to me, Mike, that we're going to go dive at, where there's an actual part of either a pylon or a pipe sticking up, right, about 12 feet.
Correct. And so in that case, we're going to have to. It's a little bit dangerous to have a wellbore sticking up out of the ground. And in the highest elevation is 7 feet above the mud line. Fortunately, it's in about 17 feet of water, but that's still a little bit dangerous. And matter of fact, there's another well that's nearby that one that's been laid over flat. So some kind of a marine vessel mowed that thing down in the past. So those wells that are sticking up like that, we'll cut them down to near the mud line.
It could have been our barge. Who knows? Coming in.
I don't think so.
They'd have heard it. Yeah, they'd have heard it.
And then any idea how long the plugs last? And is there any danger of corrosion of the caps and pipes?
That's a good question. So we know that these wells are 120 years old, and the casings are really in kind of fairly decent shape for being 120 years old. But those old casing strings were, maybe a 1/2 inch wall thickness or less. And the pipe pile that we use, as I mentioned earlier, has a 1 inch wall thickness. And so they're going to be there for a long time. much longer than, we're already past 100 years on these old well bores. The pipe piles are going to be there for a long time.
Yeah, I think that answers the next question too. We're not gonna be around, and our kids won't be around when they're corroding. And
All right.
there's gonna be-
Jim would like to know, are you using autonomous or remotely operated underwater vehicles to observe these deeper wellheads?
Yeah, we didn't have enough time to go into all the technology, but yes, we have an autonomous underwater drone, as well as manually controlled drone that we did use off our Reef Guardians vessel to pinpoint these after the drone narrowed down the field. And hopefully we'll get a little bit more sophisticated gear for the next ones that have better camera imaging, because it was really difficult. The visibility was pretty poor. So I actually wound up going down and diving on a few of those to locate them. So I think an AUV would be great. Generously donate to Heal the Ocean so we can get one. I think that answers that question. The aerial too is autonomous to somewhat when you're doing photogrammetric images to help us with locating these wells. So we can constantly send a drone to the exact same point over and over again. I prefer to manually do it and go to that GPS point, but it's getting very easy and the tools are very sophisticated. Hey, in that video, we used multi-beam sonar to paint a picture of the bottom. You can actually see sonar imaging of that pipe that was bent, of the Treadwell wellhead. It's pretty amazing technology that we're using, including we had dual magnetometers being towed. We had a stereo picture. We tried to get some of these are buried too deep. You couldn't pick them up with one magnetometer. And the method using two that I think Eric Crow came up with from Interact really worked well to finally pinpoint the exact locations. So I hope that answers Jim's questions. And
Can I say something?
Yes, you
Am I
may.
live?
Yeah, you're live.
Oh, I have to say this. Thinking of high technology, when Becker was bubbling up in the sand, your state lands petroleum engineer, Steve Curran, came to our office and said, here's how we stop this, because we wanted not to have all this stuff all over the beach. And he took a fence post, a stick. He said, follow me. And we went right into the bubbling mess. He stuck the stick down there and it stopped. We watched it just stop. So Heal the Ocean, we had an intern there that every so often days, at least twice a week, would go down there and stick the stick in. But it was in the surf zone. So when people started body surfing, we thought, oh my God, this is dangerous. They could just over it. And so but we put a flag on it, and then finally it got remediated. But a stick stopped the oil from coming up.
That's like the finger in the dike, right? That's like great.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
So I'm thinking,
How are we doing on time, Greg?
So I imagine you're capping the worst ones so far, and then there's a question about there's just not enough oil coming from any of these to harvest. That was one of the questions. So how many more do you think need to be capped that are actually leaking that you think you'll need to go in and cap?
Well, there's three that are confirmed to be leaking, and another one that, based upon our recent dive survey, there's evidence that it had been leaking, but it wasn't leaking when we did the dive. So we've got 4 wells identified, and then there's still some sheens that are out there that we need to find the origin of those sheens, and there's going to be some more. And remember, there's 190 wells out there. And there's going to be a few more that we discover to be leaking. And one thing to point out, as we cap these wells, the oil pressure it's minimal, but it's gonna want to find the next least path of resistance. And so it's possible that as we cap wells, that oil will migrate to another well or another exit point that will cause a leak that was before unknown or wasn't leaking. So, you know, we suspect that's going to happen over time.
Yeah, I know, Dave, you believe in that because how they penetrate and move on to another area if you block them somewhere else. Right?
It's going to be an interesting case study because you know, a lot of seepage occurs not by a pressure drive, but by a buoyancy drive. Yeah. And so, you know, if it's buoyancy that's bringing something up, then it might not have the pressure to push it to another well, which would be great. I don't know. It's a hypothesis that Mike is currently testing, I think.
It's an ongoing learning process. Okay.
So, the term abandonment carries a negative connotation, or can a well be abandoned properly and thus not be a negative connotation?
Yeah, it's funny because I was talking with my brother about that. He goes, "What do you mean abandoned?" So they let them leak and they leave them. It's a term that I had to come to grips with because to me it's always, hey, you're capping the wells, right? You're going to cap it. Well abandonment just simply means this entire process from the beginning to the end, and that means the whole ball of yarn there, the whole works from environmental impact reports to the studies to doing the whole thing, and to finally the end of it is putting that cap on. So consider that they're one and the same. It's just capping is a part of that abandonment process and defining that term.
Is there any, so there's seeps off of Carpinteria. Was there any evidence of wells in that area?
Yeah, well, yes. There's actually a history from an oil refinery plant, I guess, in a reserve, that there were pipes, you know, where they brought oil, I guess, via wharfs and things, and they offloaded. And, you know, we're still digging into that. We don't know enough. And I think possibly Chevron's been very helpful. They were real helpful because we had to remove a tremendous boat wreck and debris near the seal sanctuary. And there's pipes all over the place that they put walls of concrete over going all the way down to the beach. So it's something we need to look into, is the infrastructure in all those areas to see if, were there indeed pipes? Were they piping the stuff? Were they using the pipes to get stuff onto a boat, off a boat? We don't know. That's part of all this funding and what it's going to go towards, and we'll continue our effort to find out. It's really a lot of investigative work.
A lot of the production in the Carp area was from a large open pit asphalt mine back in the around the turn of the century. So they were just, you know, they just had a giant pit where the dump used to be. It was a pit of asphalt before then. I don't know about any wells there, but that was the main source of the material.
There are some wells out there. Matter of fact, you mentioned Eric Crow earlier, but Eric and I were on the beach, and there are some wells that we actually put our hands on out there that were exposed at a particular low tide. Those correspond to CalGEM maps of well locations. So there's a fair number of wells out there in addition to what that pit that you were talking about, David, and then any kind of pipes or whatever, Harry. There's quite a few wells out there.
Yeah, well, we went out there, and with the drone too, we X'd and marked on the beach too, according to the Dogger map. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, you got your hands on a wellhead that wasn't recorded properly as usual on that geological survey. So believe it or not, there were people putting up submarine wells, as they called them, back then in that area.
So if we find an X on the beach, Harry, we shouldn't erase it. We shouldn't. That's your marker. All right.
It's long gone.
Final question. We've talked about tar, asphaltum, and oil. Can somebody just kind of define the what each one of those?
Yeah,
I guess that falls to me. Yeah, I mean, that's a PhD dissertation to accurately define the difference.
Oh, we're out of time now. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they're all components of petroleum. And when oil gets cooked by Mother Nature deep down in the earth, it goes through phases where it has more and less of these different components to it. But, you know, we use them somewhat colloquially. They don't have great definitions, and you can go to a meeting on this stuff and no two people will actually agree. So I can tell you what I think, but the reality is they're all just different flavors of petroleum squeezed out of Mother Earth.
Yeah, and the cool thing about what Dave said is that it's cooked in Mother Earth. Well, a lot of people drive by refineries and they see those tall towers. They don't realize the process going on at each level are those components where you get the tar and the asphalt, and there's a pipe coming out of each part of that high rise that takes that component out of the oil. So it's pretty interesting how we imitate nature, but unfortunately we make a bigger mess.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Harry,
Sure.
Mike, David, Hannah-Beth, Hillary, Joe. Greatly appreciate it. This was wonderful and very educational. Again, it's recorded. We'll be on our website, sbmm.org. And we hope to see you here at the museum soon and back here next month for our next lecture.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Check out Dave on DDT. All right. Yeah, thank you.
In person
Yes.
October.
Thank
Bye.
you,
Thank you, everybody.
Marine
Thank you all.
Museum. Thank you, Santa Barbara Marine Museum. Thank you, Harry.
Yeah.
Night.